We had a podcast
I
that dropped
posted, yeah, I
today. Sorry.
posted a article. I haven't been able to grab the full article yet, but I will get that. And as soon as I, get more details, I can uh, let you all know just a little bit more about it. But the only thing I could post was the abstract. And the article was full squat produces greater neuromuscular and functional adaptations and lower pain than partial squats after prolonged resistance training. So some of the literature has, and I'll put this right out there because I've learned to do that. Um, my conformational bias is this. So I did not find this article on my own. I saw it somewhere else and I read through the abstract and I loved it. So I thought I would post it because Erica and I have talked about squats and squat progressions. Quite a bit. We've talked about progressions of the feet and, just a bunch of different things. But we've also talked a lot about the hip. And I think the reason that I like this article is because for the first time, it's attempting to look at things other than just the performance of a squat.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, Susan. Sorry,
That's
everybody.
okay. Yeah. So it's looking at things other than just the performance of a squat. And so, because, the question is, why do we do squats? So people can squat down better. But sometimes the exercises and the things that we do make us better doing other things as well.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to point out about this article because I thought it was great. Just to let everybody know, I'll just kind of go through a couple of particulars and then you and I can kind of talk just a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's the one that you posted. It's the one that Susan
It's the
posted
one I posted.
yesterday.
Yeah, I posted it yesterday in our Facebook group. So, and if you want the full text article, you're going to have to email us, because you can only give it away to one person at a time. There is no way I can publicly post it, but I don't have it yet. So give me a day or two to get it. Okay, so off to the races here. So they looked at full squat, which was butt towards the ground, all the way down as low as you can go. They looked at a parallel squat with the feet in parallel. Now, again, I only have the abstract, so I don't know what parallel means, like hip width, wide, or the feet turned in, or the feet parallel. I don't know, but that's what they said there. Half squat to me means that you're going halfway down, or like Erica would call it a tabletop squat, I think you called it. So the thighs are like tabletop.
Yep.
And then a control, which was a training cessation. So they didn't do anything. And so they completed a 10-week velocity-based program using the same relative load. And they looked at 60%, 80%, and 1 rep max. And they only differing in the depth of the squat trained. So they trained at those depths. So in other words, the full squat trained at full squat, the parallel squat trained in parallel, the half squat trained at half squat. And then they wanted to look at so they looked at neuromuscular adaptation, which I thought was very cool. You can go in and read a little bit more about how they actually did the training. And we'll talk about progression here in a minute. But neuromuscular adaptations were evaluated by a 1 rep maximum strength in that activity, a mean velocity. So how fast could they propulse or come up out of the squat is what I'm taking this to mean. Again, I don't have the full article. At each squatting depth. And then the functional performance was assessed by counter movement jump, 20 meter sprint, and the Wingate tests. If you don't know anything about the Wingate test, I had to look that up. That's a anaerobic burst of energy measured on the bike. And that was first performed in 1970 at Wingate University. So you can look up a little bit more about it, but that's considered to be power. Right? Anaerobic burst is power before you get into endurance. So it's a different part of the Krebs cycle, or maybe not even the Krebs cycle. It's a different energy cycle for anaerobic versus aerobic type activity. And so what they found, which was very cool, was they found that that people did better if they trained at the full squat or the parallel squat. They had great improvements in all of these types of movements. And that the people who trained at half squat not only didn't do as good, but they were the only group reporting significant increases of pain, stiffness, and physical functioning disability. They did a couple of physical disability functional outcome measures with these people, and you can read the article to see what they were doing. And I thought that was so interesting because when we think about that and we think about meeting people where they are, I think it's really important. And so this is one of the things that I wanted to hop on and talk about with you, Erica, because My bias is I want people to go as low as they can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd love for everybody to get down to a full squat. We were just talking about how we've kind of both modified our home workspaces to where we have a little bit better room to do some of these functional activities, because I've noticed that I haven't been squatting as much since I've been at home. I'm actually doing more when I jump in and out of my truck than I'm doing at home in the house. So, um, but my so coming from a neurological background, and I'm just going to throw this out to you, Erica, and then you can chime in with your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I've always kind of just started with people at various level of sit to stand. So to me, I'm going to use sit to stand as kind of as a beginning method of assessing how people can squat. How low can they sit and how much from a seated position can they stand up? To me, that's the basic functional activity of a squat, besides just squatting to the ground and lifting things up.
Yep.
And I've always kind of contended that you start where they are, but you immediately progress them to higher and to lower loads.
Mm-hmm.
This particular article didn't talk about moving to, being up higher for the little like mini squats.
Mm-hmm.
It talked about going to that tabletop squat, which is just like the basic seated if your thighs are at tabletop, or half squat. And then it talked about going into, keeping your feet parallel and or going into a very deep squat.
Yep.
Again, don't know the parameters of exactly what that squat looked like because we don't have the full text of the article. But what this article seems to have found is that when you keep people at that half squat and they train at that half squat, that they actually end up having more problems than actually doing the thing that people are afraid to do, which is to go deeper into their squat.
Yeah. Yeah. You almost wonder if they're doing the half squat wrong. And I think that for me, like I literally have to squat to the floor. I'm pretty flexible. I've got a lot of hip flexion and knee flexion. I can go right to the floor, butt to the floor if my calves are relatively flexible that day. And I practice that because I need to do that. But what's been interesting, and I did not read obviously the full text either, but I do train. So I start out, and we've talked about this a lot in the podcast and in the Facebook Live about, people have hip issues and, they want to go, they want to go right to the floor. And, for the hip, that's a pretty symmetrical, relatively easy activity if you have the requisite hip flexion. The harder thing is just doing like a one-legged squat, obviously on a hip.
Mm-hmm.
But, I test the squat I tested parallel. I mean, narrow or parallel, hip width, and then I test it wide. And obviously people, when they go wide, they've got more of that sumo, that externally rotated, and they can go down pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting to me is people squat better when they go lower.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I actually treated somebody yesterday outdoors and he had a hip issue and we talked about the squat. So I told him to hold on to, like, get into a door jam, hold on to the door jam. So he's like, sort of parallel with the doorway, and get very close to the doorway and squat and try to get your butt to hit the other side of the door jam. So he was literally squatting and he was going really low. That's how you properly squat. So people I'm thinking, why didn't the half squat work? Maybe because these people weren't even squatting properly. I think
Right.
when you go lower, they squat better.
And I'm wondering if you're going in, yeah, I like that idea, because if you're going into the half squat, are you going in tucked under, or are you going in tucked out? Or what I'm saying, like the pelvis is more into an anterior rotation or a posterior rotation as you're going down.
Yeah.
And can you go into, can you get down, what's actually happening to them and what do they look like? It would be interesting to see kind of if they gave them some coaching on squat this way.
Right.
Squat this way, what happens when you do this? So much has been written about, butt winks of, for lack of a better term, but that's just basically at the end of the squat, just tucking under. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know. To me, it depends on the functional activity that they're trying to do, or how long they're going to be hanging down there, because they're not going to hang down there as easily. Catchers tend to not butt wink, many of them, because they're like in a readiness to move out of a squatted position because of what they have to do functionally for their thing. But what about somebody pulling weeds? Or somebody squatting down to tie their shoe one leg, or to squatting down to help their kids, or or to get something out of a bottom drawer.
Right.
for goodness sakes.
Right. But you think about how much power is how much power needs to be generated with a half squat coming up versus a deep butt to floor squat. A lot more power with the deep butt to floor squat. But I think that it's easier to compensate with a little posterior tilt with a half squat than a full squat. It's really hard to compensate when you're really, you can shift your weight over to one side, but it's really hard to compensate when you require maximum knee flexion, maximum dorsiflexion, maximum hip flexion, and an interior tilt. And I think that's harder to compensate when you're down that low. So I'm wondering that could be why they didn't do well or were worse, because they weren't exploring the end range of motion of their joints
Right.
and generating a propulsion to come out of that full squat. That would be my hypothesis. But what I also love to do in a butt to floor squat is have them do side to side, like in this squat position, do a little lunge, straighten one leg out, do a little lunge, straighten the other leg out, because that would be a catcher, right? Depending on what leg is forward, catchers need to be able to shift weight
side
to side. And even when you're, if you're looking into a drawer and you need to reach something, you need to be able to sort of go out of that parallel universe, or not parallel, but out of that symmetrical, straight plane neutral universe, and go side to side in a deep squat. And you need to be able to move out of those positions well. So, but I'm wondering why the parallel, if it is, we have to read the article, but I'm wondering why a parallel squat. I know if we assume parallel is straight feet, it's harder for people to compensate that way. And I noticed that when you move feet closer together in standing or in squatting, you can generally, people who have issues with their, I don't want to say thorax, but they have translational issues, or I don't like the word asymmetry, but loss of control. When you go narrow, it can be a bit harder. So I'm wondering if it can show up more. Exactly. A compensation will show up more. So I'm wondering if that's why.
It'll be good to see what their definition of parallel squat is. Was it parallel at at their hip width or their shoulder width? Or, was it just like deep squat and then bring your feet in parallel, deep squat? I don't know. We'll have to see what that shows. But I think the most interesting thing about this article that I wanted to bring up was the fact that they didn't measure hip range of motion and knee range of motion. They didn't spend a lot, apparently. Now, maybe they did in the full text article. I'm just looking at the abstract. But what was meaningful to them was how training at that deep squat changed other aspects of neuromuscular performance.
Yeah.
In other words, their anaerobic performance improved on the bike in that Wingate test. Their force, the velocity force propulsion improved coming up out of the squat. And a 20-minute sprint. Well, they weren't training sprints.
Yeah. No.
No. But there's something about that deep squat that was really super uber training the muscles that you need, to have the kind of propulsion for a sprint. Yeah, but so they were looking at a 20-meter sprint for those people. So staying kind of more in the anaerobic range, which makes sense, because if you're lifting at 60 to 80% of your 1 rep max, you're definitely staying more anaerobic.
Yes.
Aerobic is going to be down at 10% and going 50, 60 times. That's going to train much more of the at least the cardiovascular system is going to be much more aerobic.
Yeah.
So I like the way that they were looking at activities that were basically more anaerobic to match up to the training that they did. And the surprise that came out for them was the half squat. Not only did they not improve those other parameters, but they ended up complaining of more pain and more stiffness from doing it.
Yeah, see, that blows my mind. And I mean, it doesn't in a way, but you think about it, they lost options for movement. They obviously lost options for movement. So it doesn't take, a lot of effort to do a little half squat. It really doesn't. You sit down every day. I mean, it's the same thing, right? But going to the floor. But it's very interesting because I did for my master's a long time ago in exercise physiology. I did a project on the effect of max 3 reps of knee extension exercises on the contralateral limb. So we measured strength in the right and the left, and we just did knee extension on the right. That's all we did. and the left got significantly better. So it's that
Mm-hmm.
crosstalk, that neuromuscular carryover that I think is so important when we have somebody post-operatively, for example, right? I mean, they're not going to obviously do a full squat, but this is really this neuromuscular carryover. So when you're in a deep squat, yes, if you're doing a lot of them, you've got to push your body weight up off the floor. That requires certainly a degree, a measure of anaerobic, anaerobic strength. But what I found interesting is that a lot of my older people, my older patients, they can't get up off the floor. I mean,
Right.
that is a big problem. I've had
Mm-hmm.
patients pass away from falling on the floor and they can't get up.
Right.
So so it begs the question, anybody who's listening to this, do we train our 80-year-olds to
To
go
do
to the
full
floor?
squats. Yeah. To go do full squats, to get
Yeah,
down, to get up,
yeah.
to come up into a half kneel from a full squat. What are we doing here? Because to me, it's like, wow, if people who are training at the half squat all the time, which is many people 40 and older, and that there's a younger people in there too. I'm not picking on, I'm in that age group, by the way, um, but it makes me, because people say, oh, well, they get up and down all the time. They're always up and down out of the chair. Well, maybe that's not enough. But maybe if you want their markers to increase and their power to increase, getting up and down from a chair isn't enough. Maybe we need to all be sitting on the floor more,
Yes,
and that includes moi.
yes.
It's like, wow. So, I mean, but it does, blow the whistle on, it's okay to meet people where they are, but boy, you need to get them going deeper. You
Exactly.
start immediately giving them strategies and ways to start getting out of deeper and deeper positions. So, as people get older, what do? They raise the height of their potty seat,
Exactly.
because it's easier to get on and off the commode. And it's like, I would rather have somebody have handrails on the side of the commode in a deeper seat. Well, I'm a pelvic health therapist too, so I believe in getting into a squatted position to go to the bathroom because it's easier to move your bowels. That's
Yeah.
another whole story. But to me, if they had to like do that all the time, they'd be better at it.
Yes.
And if they're having trouble, I don't know, you have pain, you have an injury, well, then you need to modify it for a bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what they do, they put in taller commodes, and it's like, don't do that.
Yeah. I mean,
You need
yeah,
to
I mean,
have
if they're
shorter ones.
right, if they're just post-op knee replacement, yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, but they need to get to the floor. I love the TRX for that. I have some of my older patients grab that TRX, lean back, like the sample, the
Uh-huh.
example in the doorway I gave earlier. Just lean back, hold on, and just go. You're not going to fall. Go, go, go. I'm right behind them, and they're usually afraid to do that.
Yeah, because they haven't for so long, and their
I
vestibular system is like, we don't belong
and
here.
they're going backwards, and they're afraid to fall backwards, right? They're
Right.
afraid to fall, and I do think that going halfway encourages, I'll say it, poor mechanics. I
Yeah.
do. I do.
Hmm.
It just does.
Because
Uh,
we see people using all kinds of crazy stuff to get in and out of chairs all the time. So perhaps maybe, and what they're doing is they're training themselves, people are training themselves into half squats.
yes.
And this, to
Yes.
me, this article, although it's small and it's small power and things like that, but it's exposing what everyday training looks like in people. And if half squats is what everybody's doing all the time, or
Yeah.
for a majority of the time, then no wonder we have more pain and stiffness.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
It's
that's
really
the outcome
interesting.
of that, whereas if we made people work a little harder and kept working a little harder at it and not make life a little easier, or at least the physical movements a little easier, then maybe we would feel better. It's just one of those things. We stop moving because we don't feel good. And then we don't realize that moving is what's going to make us feel good. And we're all included in this. Every physical therapist out there, I'm sorry. I know some
Yes.
of you are my age and older, and some of you are younger. But there are times when it just gets to be too much, when you don't feel good. And that could be
Yes.
for anything. That could be because you have asthma. It could be because you're recovering from a bad flu, or it could be because you've got a strength deficit problem that's been developed over time because of an injury or something that's happened that you just haven't, done
Mm-hmm.
the stuff for. But I just find it very interesting that getting up and down out of a chair may not be enough. In
No,
fact,
I I
it could
agree.
be a problem because there's not a lot of carryover, at least into the anaerobic power part,
Yeah.
that we're going to get with a full squat.
Yeah.
And
And
a full squat for some people, maybe it's always more than they think they can do. I've seen this
Yes.
time and time again. People, it's always more than they think they can do. And my favorite one too, Erica, like you talk about the TRX or bands, you can hold on to bands and do it as
Yeah.
well, over the door or something, is holding the doorknob on either side,
Yep.
and just teaching people, give them
Get them.
target practice, put a chair
Yep.
back there and say, get your butt on the chair back here,
Yep.
lower,
Yep.
and, working that way, or they can grab the kitchen sink,
Yeah,
and
I
down you
agree.
go, a couple of times every day while they're at the sink, or, habit stack it to brushing your teeth perhaps. But I think where it's all kind of when we talk about, stiffness and pain, particularly around the hips, that maybe the answer is not give into it, but, find ways to get through it because
Yes.
the outcome is going to be less pain and greater
Yeah.
power.
Yes, and you can practice, either very wide or very narrow or whatever works to start
Hmm.
with. But, and I've talked about my patients, this particular patient before, who has a hip issue, and he basically, and he's doing much better now, but he had a hard time squatting because he would feel that increased tone in the rectus femoris because you're just overworking certain muscle groups. And I think that, yes, you're not going to start them butt to floor squat. Maybe you will. It depends on what they look like, but you can certainly mirror those do bent knee raises with breathing and really work on the breath work with the squat. But I think that for somebody, especially a young guy who wants to squat, most people want to squat. I mean, and I look at a squat. It's interesting. I look at a squat on everybody. I mean, I don't care what you're coming in with. I look at the squat, and I look at a deep squat at the beginning? No, I don't. But I do look at a squat because I'm comfortable evaluating a squat. Like one patient I had told me he really had a problem going deep butt to floor squat, and I did look at it, but I had a hard time assessing it. So I had him go halfway first, and then I did a few things, and then I had him repeat the butt to the floor squat to see if what I did,
Hmm.
if that helped, because he wanted to be able to do that because he once again, he was super flexible, but he wanted to be able, and he was young, but he wanted to be able to add weight onto the
Hmm.
squat. And that's the other thing. When do you want to be able to add weight? So how much weight do you add to something like that? It just depends on the person, right? On
Yeah,
what
you
they
should
want to do.
start. Yeah, it depends on how conditioned they are into it or not. Like first they
Yeah.
need to get their body up and down. Once they can get their body up and down, then you start adding.
Yeah. I mean,
Do you add a kettlebell to it? Do you add a bar to it? Do you add a grocery bag to it? What do you add? But you add something so that you can begin to start to progress,
yeah.
the power, because even older people, they can still, I hear this all the time. I'm not making any more testosterone, so therefore I won't make more muscle. No, optimize what you have.
Yes.
You're
Yes,
going
for
to
sure.
still get stronger. We're all going to get stronger if we challenge ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just looking at who's watching.
Mm-hmm.
Manakashi, hi, hi. So I agree. I mean, if think about, think about your moms, right? They got
Mm-hmm.
a child in one, and then they're picking up a grocery. They're doing like almost a squat with a lunge, like a deep lunge, basically. And so, for me, my progression for like a squat, you can do you can do like 75% squat. You can do a butt to the floor squat. Then you can have them do a split squat, because I mean, those split squats are really functional when you're squatting in a split stride stance position, and you go down as low as you. That's very, very functional. You're in a split squat, you're picking up something versus doing a full squat. And then you could go deep squat side to side, like a lateral lunge. And then you could do a very deep lunge. Those are really low, deep exercises that you could do. And then you could progress by either going out of the sagittal plane, going transverse, or you can add weight to it, or you can add, we love talking about eyes. You can close your eyes. I mean, things like that. That would be, or literally have them in a really deep butt to floor squat and play catch with them. Right. I mean, those are some really great progressions.
Yeah, so I
Um,
think to me as we get close to ending our Facebook Live here, my take home message is if people tell you what should I do when I go to the gym, my take home message here is figure out a way to start getting deeper and deeper in your squats and
yes.
start loading them.
Yes, I
It's
agree.
just because this really brings home the things that I think we know and the things that we trust. But it's another article that can confirm that I'd rather you squat deeper then do a whole bunch at a position that you're comfortable in.
Yeah, and for
So
those
find the
yeah.
deeper positions and really start to develop those and really start to train those. And then, like you say, Erica, then start giving the variance around it. But if you only have time for one thing, go deep.
Yeah, for people who are coming in late, we'll post the links to the article
Sure.
again
Yeah.
in under the Facebook Live. And if you have patients who just, are afraid, start them in the doorway, start them with the TRX machine. But I do believe, and we can post this in the group, I do believe we should train people who are in their 80s to go butt to floor if they can. I mean, if they have, no significant knee problems, I mean, a lot of people do, but how are they going to get up off the floor? So I think we need to train them with assistance first, and then load
Yes.
them. And I believe load and range are very important for life. I had a patient this morning. She's like, couldn't, do this. And I said, do you reach up in the cupboard? She's like, I do it all the time. So it's like, our lives and what we do in our life requires a lot of these movements. And what I find fascinating in this article, and we can end with this, is that it actually increased power and cardio-respiratory endurance in a 20-minute running test, as well as just other variables that they assessed. And that just goes to show you the neuromuscular crossover of doing load at end range. And
Yeah.
you can do it,
And
you can do
that's
it
what we're talking
safely.
about is end range.
Yeah.
And a half squat is not end range.
No way. No.
And in the beginning, it might be for somebody who really has some joint stiffness, but I promise you, if you start challenging that before you start loading, then you're going to be able to get them a little bit deeper. You just may have to go with a much slower progression and a much more careful progression and assistance to it as well.
Yeah.
You can't just take somebody and say, go deep if you've never done that before. You got to meet them where they are. But my thing is, instead of meeting where they are all the time, is can we begin to get them to go a little bit deeper? And I think we're getting a question here.
Yeah. From Adam.
From Adam. Yep. Any caution with older people and deep squatting with lumbar fracture due to osteoporosis, thinking lumbar flexion substitution for poor hip flexion range of motion. Yeah, Adam, that's some of the things that we definitely, you have to kind of consider the whole person. And Erica and I were talking about actually looking at a half squat just to kind of see what's happening. Because if they're starting to like super lumbar flex before they're even halfway down, then we've got a problem with somebody just going from regular sit to stand.
Yeah.
That has osteoporosis, that might be a little bit more at risk for loading those vertebral bodies a little bit more. So really working on maybe gaining that lumbar extension range just slightly, enough to get out of flexion as they begin to develop the hip flexion to go down. Mm-hmm. So we definitely want to be sure that we're not overriding the hip flexion that's necessary by lumbar flexion or thoracic hunching, or and that also goes down. This is a great question, Adam. Thank you for allowing us to expand a little bit more. But also for people who need to develop a little bit more ankle dorsiflexion.
Totally. Yeah.
So, but I think that the idea here is don't just train at one piece, and, certainly people can have too much lumbar flexion at a half squat, so for your older patients, so you may have to back them up a little bit and start kind of how can we work and get more motion above the hips and below the hips and also at the hips as we're moving into that, so that they're not just like rounding down in a ball to a squat, but like you were talking about, Erica, just taking a look at it, seeing what they're missing, seeing if we can add some more to it, and then kind of having them progress it as we kind of keep going. So for somebody like that Adam was bringing up here, we would start a little higher with them for sure, and really help begin to load them in a new and different way. And that would be with their own body weight in the beginning, and maybe with some assistance like arms up, holding on to something.
Say TRX to see
doing or just the wall, or something to hold on to, the doorknob, anything where they can begin to like maybe even just get into that partial squat and begin to feel the range of motion changes, and rocking forward to get the ankle dorsiflexion, getting some lumbar straightness if they can't go into extension, and really beginning to challenge that hip hinge for them that they may have lost for whatever reason. And once you can kind of get that, I think what you're doing is challenging that person at end range there.
Yeah.
And that's what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And getting him also like maybe on a ball and doing that on like a Swiss ball, and get him low on a Swiss ball. and see if they can
Exactly.
do like on a very like a 35, 45, 55 ball, and getting them do a lumbar, anterior, posterior tilt, rocking back and forth on a low ball. So get their center of mass down and practice those movement patterns when they're low. And if they need assistance getting up, you help them up. But I think those are great ways to get their gaze down lower too. Because as you get older, you got neck restrictions, you got all sorts of things, right? And they're just going to look down because a lot of them can't look up anymore when they get older. So
Yep.
that's a great question, Adam. Thank you for
Yeah, you have to
for
consider the whole person integratively for certain, and take
Yeah.
a look at what else may be happening and why. But
Yeah.
the as far as I'm concerned, the glutes are the engine muscle, and any way we can get them, rolling a little bit better, I think it's going to be helpful for our clients.
Yeah, and just one more thing. I'm just thinking of a patient I have. He loves bridging, and I'm like, the guy is doing it completely wrong. He's not even recruiting his glutes at all. Okay, all he's doing is just pushing his back up. And if you think about it, so I got him up into a squat. I had him hold onto the door jamb, and I had him literally go back into the squat, so he actually felt his glutes. I'm like, that's what you should be feeling when you do a bridge. I don't give bridging out very much, but he kind of wanted to do it. And when he did it the right way, he realized how weak he was because he was just compensating. And so ultimately, it's not a real functional exercise, but we can touch whole nother Facebook Live, but I think that, if you can get them up into a position with some assistance first to get them to feel what they're supposed to feel, and then train small ranges, and then you can get them lower. Rome wasn't built in a day. You're not going to get these people to the floor immediately. But like for myself, I have to do that every day. So I literally do that every day. Now that I'm here at home, I'm going butt to the floor every day. Because if I can't get out, if I can't get up or get down, I'm like, that's not good.
Exactly.
So
All right. Thank you,
go.
everybody. I thought it
Thank
was
you.
good to find that and to post it and bring up some good information. Feel free to leave more comments about it, either
Absolutely.
here or either under the article that I penned, and posted for you. So, and
Oh, we
we'll
could pin the post if you want. I can pin the post
yeah.
on the Facebook group. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good one.
yeah, that'd be great. But I've got,
Yeah.
the article is on the Facebook group, and if you guys run into any articles that you think are great for like changing patient, I brought this one up because it just showed that the patients who really trained at half squat had more problems and didn't make the gains that they did
Amazing.
when they went deeper. So whatever we can do to get our folks to, as Erica says, probably at least to their end range, even if it's a different end range than what we would hope for them, it's still more than what they think. That nobody really ever goes to end range. So when we can get people to really trust that they can go to end range without sacrificing something else, then I think we should really be striving to do that.
I agree.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Feel free to leave any comments. Enjoy. Thank you all for listening.